This is the fancy pheasant tail. To get started, I've put a size 14 straight shank hook into the vise. You can tie these down to 10s or up to 18s or 20s. This particular hook is a dry fly hook. I like to use some of my dry fly hooks as nymph hooks just because they have a wider gap than some of the nymph hooks out there. I have a 2.4 millimeter black nickel brass bead, and I'm tying in my materials with 70 Denier UTC thread in wine color. I'm using wine color because I use the last few wraps to create a hotspot. So you can use pink or orange or red or whatever you like your hotspot thread to be. If you don't want to add one, rusty brown or brown will work. For tailing material, I'm not going to be using pheasant tail. I'm going to be using Coq de Leon tailing material. This is just some whiting Coq de Leon and Pardo. I've lined up the tips in a hair stacker. I don't like my tails to be super long or super bushy. So those were a little too short. Wait. That looks about right. Get these tied in and then snip off the butt ends. So that's one of the first changes I make to your standard pheasant tail is the tailing fibers. Another change I make is I don't use like lead free or lead wire wrapped right around the bead. That's by design. You'll see why I do that later. Next, we're gonna tie in a piece of small brown ultra wire. Get this tied in. I'm trying to make as few wraps as possible because I want to keep the body thin. For that reason, when building up the pheasant tail body, I only pull 3 pheasant tail fibers for wrapping. This is brown pheasant tail. Cut off the brittle tips and then tie it in. Add back to your tails. And then just build up a little bit of a taper with your thread. Since we tie in a lot towards the back, just take a few passes. Next, wrap your pheasant tail around the hook, touching wrap so none of the thread shows through. Once you get to about the 2/3 point, the body, just tie it off and snip off the tag ends. Next, we want to counter wrap our pheasant tail to add some durability. So take your small brown wire and just make evenly spaced wraps up the body of the fly. And then since it's kind of awkward to tie in your wire when you counter wrap it, the angle's a little weird. I like to make a couple wraps around each side before helicoptering it off. It should helicopter off here. Next, I take a length of small pearl tinsel and tie it to the top of the body. You want it directly on top. Fiber that's tie it to the top of the body. And then take a goose biot. So your normal pheasant tail will just use the tinsel or use more pheasant tail as a wing case. I love biots, so here's a brown, like Prince Nymph colored goose biot. I'm going to snip it off where it starts to get a little thicker and then lay it upside down on the hook and tie it in so it's perfectly on top. Next, take just a small little touch of Peacock eye stub. I'm talking just a few fibers and create a short, thin little dubbing noodle. I mean, we want it to be one wrap around the body. So something like that. Then just go it up a little bit, right where your pheasant tail meets the other materials. Next, we're going to take some goose biots to use as legs. This is another scenario where I exchange out the traditional use of pheasant tail and use a different material. Pheasant tail is super delicate, and I think using at least these materials makes it a touch more durable. So get these tied in and start leaving them a little long. You kind of want to angle them down if you can. But once you get them, you can kind of pull them to length. Okay. And then build up a few. Crank down on your wraps without breaking your thread. Right around the base, and then you can come in here and pull them off without leaving a tag end. Just kind of pull down. Your legs are still attached, but you don't leave any kind of tail tag end getting in the way. Next, you take two more and repeat the process, but going forward. So this is why we don't want to add wire at the beginning, is because we want these legs not to be able to angle back at some point, and you can't do that if you have too much buildup underneath their tie-in. Good. Okay. So when you pull down on them, you can see them start to try and move back. But we'll get them to move back in a sec. You can do the same process here where you crank down and then pull up to break them off where they don't leave a tag end. Next, you're going to take your Peacock Hurl, and most pheasant tails will tell you to tie in with 2 to 4 of them, but I just use 1. I just search through my pack for one that looks like they've got decently long fibers on him, and then break off the brittle tip. Like, see, these fibers seem decently long, and then tie it in. Then just wrap. Usually about 4 is right. And then to tie it off, come around the 2 front legs that you tied in. And then you can kind of pinch them and tie behind them. This will help make them angle back. Then you can come in here and snip off your Peacock Hurl. The last step is to take both the Goose Biot and your Pearl Tinsel and get them to lay on top of each other directly in the middle, and then tie them in. You want your Pearl Tinsel right in the middle of it. That'll make your wing case. And come in here with your sharpest scissors, making sure you don't cut off any of your legs. Snip that off as close as you can. Then go directly into a whip finish. About 4. So enough to build up a little bit of a hot spot, but also enough to lock in everything. Snip it off. Then come in here with a little bit of head cement. This will help hold the tinsel and wing case in place. And just hold your thread wraps in place. And then that's a fancy pheasant tail. Only uses pheasant tail for the body, Coq de Leon tailing fibers, Biots for wing case and legs. Tie them up, they work pretty well.